So today we're going to be talking about how the government has been using the pandemic to give contracts to the private sector without any bidding or any transparency. So this is according to the Guardian. The government is using the coronavirus pandemic to transfer key public health duties from the NHS and other state bodies to the private sector without proper scrutiny, critics have warned. So, doctors, campaign groups, academics, and MPs raised concern about the power grab after it emerged on Monday that Serco was in pole position to win a deal to supply 15,000 call handlers for government's tracking and tracing operation. That's not gone live yet, but other countries have already done a tracking and tracing apps and things like that. So Matt Hancock, they said the Health Secretary Matt Hancock has accelerated the dismantling of state healthcare, and that duty to keep the public safe was outsourced to the private sector. So in recent weeks, ministers have been using powers to bypass normal tendering and award of a string of contracts to private companies and management consultants without open competition. So the argument that capitalism and libertarianism relies on competition and bidding and the free market, that's all been taken away because they've been given these contracts without the regular bidding process. Hella corrupt. So we've got some big companies here: Deloitte, KPMG, Serco, Sodexo, Might, Boots, and the US data mining group Palantir have secured taxpayer-funded commissions to manage COVID-19 drive-in testing centres and the purchase of personal protective equipment and the Nightingale hospitals. Now the Guardian has been sent a letter from the Department of Health to NHS Trust instructing them to stop buying any of their own PPE and ventilators. So the government has told hospitals to stop buying their own equipment and certain types of machines. And the list is a list of 16 items must be handled centrally. So PPE, we've got CT scanners, mobile X-ray machines, and ultrasounds. Are high value machines that are used more widely in hospitals. So basically the government has told these hospitals, these trusts, stop buying these things, that it's going to be handled centrally, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in the way they've done it, it is a bad thing. So centralising purchases has handed more responsibility to Deloitte, as well as coordinating COVID-19 tests, centres and logistics at 3 lighthouse laboratories, create process samples. So these labs are based in Milton Keynes, so they're not very spread out. Milton Keynes, Glasgow, and there was one more. So Cheshire, Milton Keynes, and Glasgow. So they're not massively spread out throughout the country. And so if we go back up here, so this is the list here. So if you want to read through that, feel free just to pause the video and to read that. So that's from Jonathan Maron, the Director General, PPE and Public Health and Social Care. The Director General for the Department of Health and Social Care, and you have the Chief Commercial Officer. And so what's happened from what we can tell is that these are no bids as well. So no one bid for these. So this is not done in the public's interest. And so Rachel Reeves has said the government must not allow the current crisis to be used as cover to extend creeping privatisation of the NHS. So what they're doing is taking away some of the responsibilities of the NHS, which is payroll, purchasing of protective equipment and machines, and recruitment and testing, and giving it to the private sector. So Tony O'Sullivan, a retired paediatrician who co-owns the campaign group Keep Our NHS Public, was saying this is a dangerous time for the NHS. The error-ridden response from the government had exposed a decade of underfunding. Now, rather than learning from their errors, they are compounding them by centralising decision-making, by outsourcing the huge responsibility for the safety of the public to private companies. Alison Pollock, the director of the Newcastle University Centre for Excellence in Regulatory Science, said tasks including testing, contact tracing and purchasing should be handled through regional authorities rather than central government. So giving the power away to regions rather than having it centralised would be a more efficient system, so long as you employ competent people. So that's kind of the main points within this article, but we can see if we scroll down. The outsourcing test centres, so contracts to operate drive-through coronavirus testing centres were awarded under special pandemic rules through a fast-track process without open competition. So crony capitalism at its finest. The contracts, the value have not been disclosed, were granted to accountants Deloitte, which is managing logistics at a national level. Deloitte then appointed outsourcing specialist Serco, Mike G4S, and Sodexo, and pharmacy chain Boots to manage the centre. So the Deloitte had been given part of the contract, and then they outsourced their contract to other companies. Scumbag behaviour. Lab tests. A coalition of private companies and public bodies have come together to form Lighthouse Labs. So we don't even know who these people are. They're just a conglomerate of organisations to test samples in 3 centres: Milton Keynes, Cheshire, and Glasgow. Deloitte is handling payroll, rotas, and other logistics, working alongside pharmaceutical giants Glasgow Smith. In Milton Keynes, so Cheshire, Glasgow, pharmaceutical giants Glasgow Smith, AstraZeneca. These names are also Amazon, who don't pay tax, and Boots. So Nightingale Hospitals, dozens of private companies have won companies to build and run support the Nightingale Hospitals consultancy firm KPMG, Excel Centre, and we know these hospitals are a joke because they didn't have enough nurses, so they couldn't even do their jobs properly. Outsourcing firm Interserve worked on the construction of the Birmingham Nightingale Hospital at the NEC, and has awarded contract to hire about 1,500 staff to run the Manchester Nightingale Hospital. G4S secured the contract to supply security guards for the Nightingale Hospital. So the usual suspects here. Recruiting extra NHS staff and hospital staff went to Capita, another outsourcing firm. Was awarded the contract to help the NHS vet and onboard thousands of returning doctors and nurses, something the NHS probably could have done on its own, or they could have recruited the staff on its own, but they get charged a fee for each person they're given, essentially. PPE, so the government has appointed Deloitte to help ramp up, which is the government's phrase, British production of protective equipment and source stocks from the UK and abroad. Some figures in the UK manufacturing industry have described the project as a disaster and accusing Deloitte of pursuing factories in China. I'm not even surprised, where prices have leapt and supplies tight due to a huge demand, rather than focusing on retooling UK factories and making more kit here. So it's so much for manufacturing in Britain. Clipper Logistics, a Yorkshire-based logistics and supply firm founded by the Conservative donor Steve Parkin, imagine him getting a contract, was awarded government contract to supply and deliver equipment. And so what we can see is the government has outsourced in multiple responsibilities from the NHS into private hands, such as recruiting and getting staff who have been out because of the coronavirus, getting equipment, payroll, all this stuff, right? And so if we go to this article here, we can see that KPMG, Deloitte, and PwC give parties £1 million since the 2010 poll. And so it's not just the Conservative Party. It's important to stress that they've given money to Labour. PwC has, and I don't think PwC were actually mentioned here. If we check the article, I might be wrong. No, PwC are not even here, and so that's not a surprise. But KPMG are here. And so what a surprise that is, that organisations that have actually helped the Conservative Party have given contracts to companies that fund the Conservative Party and have given free services. So if we look here, a huge accountancy firm, which is Deloitte, would be expected to know the value of... let's have a look. That's not it. So Deloitte, Ernst and Young, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, have given donations of staff costs worth 1.36 million and consultancy work equaling 500,000 to political parties since May 2009. And so the point here isn't that companies shouldn't be given donations to parties. And if this was the Labour Party doing this, I'd give the exact same criticism. But what we can actually see from this is that these companies that have donated to the Conservative Party have been given no bid contracts, and that instead of focusing on even British manufacturing, they're focusing on manufacturing from China, and the fact that companies that don't pay tax, like Amazon, are getting contracts. So there's more money being funneled away from the taxpayer. And so if we go to the final two articles, we can see that cleaners at London Hospital walk out after contractors failed to pay wages. So cleaning staff that were hired for the NHS by a private contractor went on strike and walked out because they weren't paid by the private contractor. It's been an ongoing issue since February, and this article was written in March. So it took a month and despite reassurances from the private contractor ISS, Helen O'Connor said, an organiser from GMB said, no cleaning took place at the hospital on Thursday. Issues with the firm's payroll system have resulted in some employees not being paid properly in weeks. And you're telling me the private sector is more efficient. What they do is, some of these companies are fine. KPMG, Deloitte, all these companies mostly fine. Apart from the fact that they do donate services, and in return they were given no bid contracts. But we can see from some of these private companies, it's not on the level. And if we go to our final article here about Carillion, which were a huge private firm getting tons of government contracts with construction. So what did Carillion do? They specialise in construction as well as facilities management and ongoing maintenance. Is worked on big private sector projects such as the Battersea Power Station redevelopment and Anfield Stadium expansion, but it's perhaps known as being one of the best suppliers to the public sector. So Carillion's collapse, and we can see here, I think this was Grayling who was in charge at this time, I'm not sure. So you can see that there's the share price crashing. They issued a profit warning, and they were again issued HS2 contracts. They were issued a railway electrification contract, and I don't know if these jobs were actually done because the company went under. And so how big is it? Well, it's huge. Carillion employs 43,000 staff globally, around half of them in the UK. So what's that? About 21,500 staff within the UK. And they're huge, operating in multiple countries. And so look at Carillion's debt. It was massive. Look, average borrowing 800 million, 600 million, 400 million. There was only 1 year in 2014 where their debt dropped slightly, and then it went up massively. And so Carillion's setbacks were in these projects. You can feel free to pause the video and read those. Why does the collapse matter? It's because they're such a big contractor in public funds. So we can see is that the government, again, is giving away no bid contracts to companies that have donated to the Conservative Party. Some of these companies do not pay tax, and they've taken responsibilities away from the NHS trust. And I guarantee you that some of these responsibilities will not be given back to the NHS. They'll be kept in the private sector. And so what the government have done is a very scummy thing, and they've messed up their response. And now they're going for They're going for not backdoor privatisation, front door privatisation. They're doing this brazenly in front of the public's eyes, not telling us how much these contracts are costing. And so I'm going to leave it there. This video's gone on long enough. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.